Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 450 library systems across the US, Canada, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator, in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors and presenters that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so honored to have scientists Rachel Page, Dina Dechmann, and Teague O'Mara, all from the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, with us here today to talk to you about their book, Bat Island, A Rare Journey into the Hidden World of Tropical Bats. Before we jump in, I want to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then I'll turn things over to our presenters. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but you can, as always, continue to submit questions during the live presentation by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. If you've already gone into full screen mode, you might need to hit the escape button to see those tabs below the video. There are quite a few of you tuning in today, so keep that in mind, and we will take as many questions as we can during the Q&A period. And as a reminder, if you have to leave early for any reason whatsoever, a link to the recording will be sent out to all registrants within about 24 hours. Now to formally introduce our guests for today. Rachel Page is a staff scientist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, where she leads the Smithsonian Bat Lab. She is deeply interested in animal behavior, specifically the sensory and cognitive tools bats use to navigate their worlds and interact with one another. Rachel has studied bats on Barro Colorado Island and the surrounding areas for over 2 decades. Dina Dechmann is a group leader at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior and a research associate at the Smithsonian Tropical Institute. An evolutionary ecologist by training, she is interested in how animals adapt to fluctuations in resources on which they depend. She's fascinated by how tiny mammals, such as bats and shrews, with their fast metabolisms, adapt their morphology, physiology, and behavior to deal with the bottlenecks created by changes in the food landscape. Teague O'Mara is the Director of Conservation Evidence at Bat Conservation International, where he develops data-driven strategies for the conservation of global bat populations. O'Mara has studied animal behavior, movement, and physiology across the globe, with a special emphasis on bats in Panama. He is a research associate at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, and an adjunct professor at Southeastern Louisiana University. Welcome all. Thank you so much for being here today. I am going to turn things over to you now.
Brandon, thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here. Welcome. So we're super excited to share our book with you today, Bat Island. This book has been a labor of love. It brought together longtime friends and colleagues, and I want to introduce the full team. We're actually 5. Christian Ziegler is the star of our show. He is an award-winning photojournalist, contributor to National Geographic, photographer for the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, and a tropical ecologist by training. So Christian is the amazing photographer whose pictures bring all these bat stories to life. So in addition to Christian's stunning photos, the book also includes 13 chapters of text, and that's jointly written by the rest of us. As Brandon mentioned, I'm Rachel Page. I'm a staff scientist here at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, or STRI, based in Panama. Dina Dechmann is a research group leader at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Konstanz, Germany, and she's a research associate at STRI. Teague O'Mara is the Director of Conservation Evidence at Bat Conservation International, and he's also a STRI research associate. And then, last but not least, we have Marco Tschapka, who is a professor at the University of Ulm in Germany, and he too is a research associate at STRI. So all 5 of us have worked for decades on this one small island in Panama, Barro Colorado Island. This is where each of us developed a passion for tropical biology, and then in particular for the study of bats. The story of Barro Colorado, or BCI, started with the construction of the Panama Canal more than a century ago. In 1913, the Chagres River was dammed, creating an enormous artificial lake, Lake Gatun, which makes up a large part of the Panama Canal. As Lake Gatun was created, the bits of land that were previously hilltops turned into islands, and the largest of these is what we now know as Barro Colorado Island, or BCI. BCI was declared a nature reserve in 1923, and the construction of a research station on the island began just a year after that. It was the first of its kind in the New World, and now, over 100 years later, visitors from all over the world come here to study, monitor, and appreciate the rich diversity of life on BCI. This tiny island is home to the best studied tropical forest worldwide. BCI is rich in biodiversity, and it hosts a stunning array of species across taxonomic groups. It's home to 76 species of bats. And just to put that in perspective, in all of New England, where I'm from, which is an area 12,000 times the size of Barro Colorado Island, there are a total of 9 species of bats, all of which are insectivorous. On this one teeny tiny island in the Panama Canal, there's 76, and they're extraordinarily diverse in what they eat, where they roost, and the senses they use to perceive the world around them. So the inspiration for the book that we're presenting here, Bat Island, is bat researcher extraordinaire Elizabeth Calco. Elizabeth was a professor at the University of Ulm and a staff scientist here at STRI, and really a pioneer of bat research on Barro Colorado Island. She died unexpectedly at the age of 49. This book, and so many of the tropical bat studies that we're going to touch on today, had their roots in her research, and we dedicate this book to her. So we'll start off at the very beginning. For Bat's origin story, I'll turn the mic to Teague.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Among mammals, bats are really quite old. So some of the oldest complete fossils we have of bat ancestors date back to about 50 to 60 million years ago. So you can see this gorgeous fossil of Onchonicterus finii. It's one of our earliest bats, and it's one of the earliest complete fossils of bats. In this fossil, we can already see the really long fingers that they need to support wings, a really long tail, but pretty substantial legs for a bat. From those early days, bats really they looked like bats. If we compare the fossil to an X-ray of a modern day bat from Switzerland, the general body plan for bats hasn't changed much at all in these last 50 million years or so. They still fly on those really long, delicate, elongated fingers. They have super powerful chests for flight. And in the bat X-ray, we can even see the small cartilaginous spurs on the heels that hold out a membrane of skin that they use to catch insects. Bat wings really are the main event for this group of mammals, so much so that we name their order or their large taxonomic group Chiroptera, and that literally means hand wing. Powered flight is what let bats conquer the night. Unlike birds, bats fly both with their arms and their legs. Their wings are made up of a very thin, flexible membrane stretched out over their elongated finger bones, and it's connected to their legs or to their feet. Their wings are incredibly flexible and can take a lot of shapes during flight due to those joints in their fingers. And if you move your own fingers, you can figure out just how flexible bat wings actually can be. They also have really small muscles embedded within the wing membrane that helps change the tension of their wings like a sail. It lets them find the best wing shape for any given challenge. Bat legs are generally small and they're used for roosting, but the major exception you can see here is from the greater bulldog bat or the greater fishing bat. And it uses these large feet and absolutely enormous claws to capture fish that are rising up to the water's surface. Interestingly, the hind limb of bats are also rotated 180 degrees relative to ours, which means that while our knees face forward in front of us, their knees are facing behind them. So when they look down at their feet, instead of seeing their toes, they see their heels. This enables them to climb up and down flat surfaces and to hang upside down, which is something that all but a relatively few number of bat species actually do. In this X-ray video, you can see the movement of the wings, and the long finger bones that support and shape the wings. And if you look at the legs, as this bat rises up, you can also see the rotation that pushes their knees out to the side, and also see just how much the legs move with every single wing beat. For this reason, bats have some of the biggest hearts and lungs relative to their body size among mammals. They need really large hearts to pump highly oxygenated blood quickly through their body to some of the most energetically expensive movement, to fuel some of the most energetically expensive movement among mammals. Their blood also contains really high percentages of red blood cells. This allows them to increase the amount of hemoglobin and transport even more oxygen through their body with every single one of their heartbeats. Bat bodies and their physiologies let them fly faster under powered flight than any other animal that we've recorded so far. So they fly over 140 kilometers or faster than 90 miles per hour. That's really fast for a small animal that's going to be smaller than your hand. So in addition to these extraordinary physiological adaptations, another component of bat ecological success stems from their unique sensory adaptations to different environments.
In addition to flight, the common ancestor to all bats evolved the ability to echolocate. Echolocation is a process by which bats emit high-frequency sounds into their environment, and then they listen closely for the echoes when these sounds bounce off objects in front of them. They then process these echoes in the brain to create detailed mental maps of their surroundings. Most bats are active echolocators. They continuously emit echolocation calls, both to navigate and to forage for food every night. The bat here is foraging in total darkness, but is able to use sound echolocation to pinpoint and with spectacular aerial accuracy capture its prey. Alternatively, there's another strategy using sound. Some bats use their enormous ears to detect sounds that the prey are making. These could be the rustling sounds of insects moving in leaf litter, or the sounds of wing beats of their prey, or for these unfortunate male frogs who are loudly calling to attract females, certain bats can key in on frog mating calls. So frog-eating bats have evolved special low-frequency hearing, allowing them to eavesdrop on another animal's communication system. Using frog mating calls as an acoustic beacon, they can find and detect their prey. And the poor male frogs are then in a tricky conundrum. They have to call to get mates, but in the process, they cannot help but expose themselves to these eavesdropping predators. So sound is clearly super important for bats, but bats have other sensory adaptations as well. For many bats, scent plays a really important role in their ecology. Many male bats have special glands that secrete pungent chemicals, or even little pockets, like you can see here, sac wings, that are used to mix specific chemical cocktails that both attract females and deter rival males. In other bat species, males will smear odorous crusts onto their forearms and perform aerial displays, spreading their own unique perfumes toward females and around their roosts. These odors are so distinct that bat researchers, even from a few meters away from a roost, can tell what species is inside and if a reproductive male is present or not. So scent is also really important in finding food. Plant-eating bats will follow odor plumes of flowering plants or ripening fruits. And contrary to the adage, blind as a bat, all bats actually have the ability to see, although to different degrees. Some bats have very small eyes that mostly detect shadow and shape, whereas others have much larger eyes capable of seeing much more clearly in the dark of night. And in a unique case of sensory adaptation, blood-feeding vampire bats have evolved the ability to detect infrared radiation from receptors located on the front of the face. So what this enables them to do is detect blood vessels close to the skin's surface when they're approaching a host for food. Some bats have even been found to use magnetoreception to navigate and orient themselves. And they use this for navigating long distances. A new sense that was discovered relatively recently are these tiny microscopic somatosensory hairs that line bat wing membranes. These hairs detect minute changes in airflow and pressure over the wings, which helps bats fine-tune their flight. In addition to these striking sensory adaptations, bats have evolved surprising life histories.
When accounting for their body size, bats are actually among the longest-lived mammals. In fact, 18 out of 19 mammals with a higher longevity quotient than humans are actually bats. The 19th is the naked mole rat. And fun fact, the longest-lived bat on record is a Brandt's bat, which was caught again after a whopping 41 years. So it was at least 41 years old at that time. Compared to a terrestrial mammal of the same size, like a mouse or a shrew, this is a lifespan that's orders of magnitude longer. Hand in hand with such long lifespans is also the ability to withstand or combat pathogens that might otherwise cause this illness or even death. Bats have incredibly resilient immune systems and anti-inflammatory mechanisms. And as such long-lived creatures, it perhaps also isn't surprising that many bats have been demonstrated to exhibit long-term cognitive skills and memory. For instance, the frog-eating bats Rachel just talked about can remember specific sounds, such as ringtones that they learned in captivity, and they can remember them for years without any subsequent reinforcement in the wild, an adaptation that may help them keep track of which frog calls signal palatable prey, even after long periods of not hearing those calls. And this information can then also be transferred socially, with one bat rapidly learning from others, both within and across species. Bats existing in the same species will separate into so-called foraging guilds. For example, bats that forage in the deep understory exhibit different behaviors and exploit different resources than those that feed in the open air. Even their wing shape gives us insight. Understory bats, shown here in teal, have short, broad wings for slow flight. They're very maneuverable and they can perform tight turns. In contrast, open-air bats, here in light blue at the top, have long, narrow wings for super fast flight, but they're bad at maneuvering in tight spaces. The fast-flying bat that Teague just mentioned a few minutes ago is in this guild. One of the easiest ways to visualize this niche separation is by looking at their echolocation calls again. We represent these calls by showing frequency as a function of time. Understory flyers, like the teal-colored bat again, have broad spectrum calls that attenuate very quickly, but they give extremely detailed information that allows the bat to navigate in a cluttered foliage and forage in dense rainforest understory. In contrast, bats that fly in the open air, a relatively simple environment, use loud calls that are much closer to a constant frequency, with the primary purpose of locking onto small aerial prey items like flying moths. The diversity in foraging ecologies we see among neotropical bats is stunning.
Bat diets range from insects to fish and frogs, with some species, as we mentioned before, highly specialized in their foraging ecologies, like these vampire bats that are adapted to feed exclusively on blood. But on BCI, perhaps most striking are the large number of species that feed on fruits, seeds, or nectar. These frugivorous and nectivorous species partition feeding resources in a number of ways. And one is size, with larger bat species eating larger fruits, for example, and smaller bats eating smaller ones. Bats play several key roles in the ecosystem. Nectivorous bats visit flowers for nectar and in the process get covered in pollen, which they transport to the next plant, which is key for the plant's reproduction. Nectar-feeding bats have extremely long tongues. In most nectar-feeding bats, the tip of the tongue is covered with little hairs that help it to collect the nectar from the flower and transport it up to the bat's mouth. In this slowed down visit of a bat to a glass tube filled with nectar, you can see the bat use its long tongue in a lapping motion, much like you've probably witnessed with a dog or a cat lapping water. Nectivory has actually evolved twice in neotropical bats. One strategy is this lapping strategy, as we see here. But in another group of bats, they do something quite different. They leave their tongue in the flower the whole time, and they transfer nectar to the mouth via two long canals on either side of the tongue, kind of like an inverted straw. Another critical ecosystem service that bats play is seed dispersal. Plants have evolved sweet, fleshy fruits surrounding their seeds, which are beacons for frugivores like this fig-eating bat. Fruit bats pick a fruit and chew it with their large molars, just like a human chewing on a piece of chewing gum. When the fruit no longer tastes sugary, the bat will spit it out. Bats sometimes also spit out the seeds. Other times they swallow them. The seeds pass through the bat's digestive system and leave its body unharmed. The seeds then germinate in a new spot away from the parent tree. This is a nice mutualistic cooperation. The bat receives food, critical for its survival, and the plant receives transportation for its seeds. Frugivorous bats often eat their own body weight in fruit every night, and this can distribute a lot of seeds. Both seed dispersing and pollinating bats are key players in maintaining a healthy, balanced tropical forest. They especially play critical roles in early stages of forest succession, and they're key in reforestation.
We've talked about how bats perceive the world, what they eat, and how they find it. But one important part of their life is still missing. Bats spend all day and often a large part of their night in their roosts. Suitable roosts are actually crucial for bats and often determine if and where bat species can even occur. Just as in their sensory or foraging ecology, bats are very diverse in their roost choices. Some of these roosts are pretty universal. Bats use hollow trees as roosts all over the world, like this Nicephorus big-eared bat emerging from a hollow fig tree on BCI. But tropical bats also use more ephemeral roosts, such as large leaves, which they modify into so-called tents to create more sheltered spaces. These bats can then also sometimes be found roosting under the eaves of houses. Bats also use other human-made structures, such as this half-sunken boat in the BCI Lab Cove. And some bats even rely on camouflage rather than shelter. These proboscis bats will not leave even as you approach them, just trying to blend in with the bark of the tree on which they roost. One really fascinating roost specialist is the white-throated round-eared bat. The males of this species dig cavities into large, live, and extremely hard termite nests, and then offer the resulting cavities as warm and safe shelters to the females. Tiny 3.5 gram Spix disc-winged bats use furled young leaves as roost. They stick to the leaf surface with suction cups on their wrists and ankles, and these bats are actually among the few that also roost upside up. The majority of a bat's time is spent inside the roost, as I just mentioned, almost always with other bats. Surprisingly, though, the social lives of bats were largely ignored for a pretty long time. But in the past decades, research on this topic has again revealed an incredible diversity. But first, we must ask, why even be social? Especially when you consider that there are some key costs of being social. For example, the spread of blood-sucking parasites like the streblid or bat fly. Bat flies are actually fascinating. They're wingless and have evolved specifically to rely on bats as their sole hosts. As a social animal, as we all have experienced in the recent years, you're also constantly exposed to pathogens that might cause infectious disease, ultimately potentially even killing you. However, of course, there are major benefits to being social as well. For instance, group mates can alert one another to approaching predators. Or they can even indicate where to find valuable or ephemeral resources like very short insect emergencies. This is something we actively research ourselves in the bat lab. Some bats fly within hearing distance of each other to eavesdrop on group members which have successfully found short-lived or variable food sources such as insect swarms. They may live in groups, at least partly just to profit from social information use like this. One of the most famous examples of social behavior is the common vampire bat, one of the only 3 species of bats that feed on blood. This species forms long-term social relationships. The female vampire bats specifically, develop stable cooperative relationships with both related and unrelated partners that in many ways are reminiscent of the relationships we observe in us humans and other great apes. Another species where you find females forming stable social groups is the omnivorous greater spear-nosed bat. When a female enters a group, she remains with that group for life. And females in the same group will also display behaviors such as foraging shifts or pup guarding that we don't often see in other species. When the balsa trees flower, these bats feed almost entirely on nectar, and the females of the group recruit each other with special screech calls to share these flowering trees, which are hard to find. Social groups of bats can also be more similar to our modern kind of human family. The carnivorous spectral bat is the largest bat in the neotropics. Males and females form monogamous pairs, creating small family groups where parents provision food to their pups during development. Now you may be wondering, is it easy to study the behavior and ecology of bats? And the answer, of course, is no. It's not. Bats are nocturnal and often lead very hidden lives. One of the oldest methods for catching them continues to be the most commonly used to this day. It's mist nets. These nets are made from super fine filament that form a mesh. And then once we catch a bat, we take measurements of their arms and legs, as well as samples like small pieces of tissue, hair, or fecal samples for molecular analysis. The next problem is then how to mark bats so we will recognize them in the future. Some researchers use rings similar to birds, but increasingly we use pit tags or microchips, just like we use for our pets. These tiny pill-shaped tags get inserted just under the skin and can be scanned to identify the bat throughout its lifetime, never needing a battery. We even use automatic readers that we install at roost entrances to identify bats as they come and go. If you do want to understand where the bats go once they leave their roost, or where they roost if we catch them in a mist net, or where they forage every night, we might also attach either radio or GPS tags in these little backpacks on captured bats, which eventually fall off again. Radio tags require us to actively track their location with radio antennas during the day and night, whereas GPS tags record precise locations automatically and then must be retrieved by either finding dropped tags or catching the bats at a later date again to download the data. Ultrasonic microphones and enable us to record and visualize the echolocation calls of bats as they forage for different resources and navigate in different habitats. Without these microphones, we lack the ability to perceive these sounds as they're outside our range of human hearing. We can also use night vision or infrared cameras to monitor the behaviors of bats without even disturbing them. For instance, much of what we now know regarding the development of these cooperative relationships among female vampire bats is owed to the use of infrared handycams and surveillance cameras. With each passing day, the technology that we use to study bats improves. Engineers continue to pack more and more technology into smaller and smaller tags, and new means of automated data collection will lead to paradigm-shifting discoveries.
So, given the threats that bats face in the modern world, these developments in technology will also enable us to better act as defenders for bats, informing us on how to best conserve and protect them. So bats are incredibly diverse, and the flexibility provided both by flight and by echolocation has brought them in tremendous ecological success. Today, there are over 1,482 bat species found across the world. They occupy nearly every single habitat except the polar regions, and it makes the order of bats the second most numerous among mammals after rodents, but they are the most ecologically diverse of all mammals. However, about 1/3 of all of these species are listed as threatened or data deficient by the IUCN. Many bats worldwide are facing a breadth of conservation issues, and we have the power to tackle some of these. We need to protect where bats eat and where they sleep. Land use change is the biggest threat to bats. Habitat degradation and the fragmentation of pristine natural areas is common and getting faster by the day. Areas that previously held vast stretches of forest that supplied places for bats to find food or to find roosts are being broken up for timber extraction, farmland, or for general development. But bats provide some help to counter land use change. Bats are some of the most effective seed dispersers on the forest. They deposit seeds from fast-growing pioneer species into places where no other mammal or no other bird will venture. Bats can do this for really important tree species that provide fruit and they provide timber for us, as well as shelter for entire ecological communities. But there are still more challenges to the future of the future survival of the world's bats. White nose syndrome is one of the biggest challenges facing bats in North America. It is caused by an invasive fungal pathogen that attacks bats during winter hibernation. And it's eliminated 99% of 3 different North American bat species. It's killed millions upon millions of individuals. Unfortunately, there's still no known treatment or cure, but protecting hibernation caves and decontaminating surfaces is a really good start. But maybe more importantly is shifting to figuring out how we can help them recover. And that's really by protecting high quality foraging areas. This lets bats put on lots of fat before hibernation to help them survive white nose infections. And quality foraging habitat also allows them to recover quickly after they emerge in the spring so that they're ready for reproduction in the summer. Wind turbines, surprisingly to many people, kill millions of bats every year around the globe. And it's likely the cause of at least one bat species in North America dramatically declining in numbers. This is a so-called green-on-green conflict because we desperately need new low-carbon power sources to reduce the effects of climate change. However, changes to the way that turbines operate can minimize bat mortality. Bats are the most active at really low wind speeds, and preventing blades from spinning at these low wind speeds when bats are active lowers the probability that bats will be hit by these spinning blades. And this costs minimally to the turbine operations. This allows wind farms to keep producing the low carbon energy that we need for our planet's future, but also minimizes biodiversity loss. Most bats feed on insects, and there is currently a global decline in insect abundance. This insect apocalypse makes it harder for bats to fill their bellies every single night. Extensive overuse of pesticides threatens insects across the world and can turn areas into dead zones. We can help this at our own homes by reducing our own pesticide use, or even better, planting pesticide-free gardens with native plants that provide food for insects that will then feed your local bat populations. Planting pesticide-free native gardens is one of the best things we can do at home to help bats. Climate change makes all of the other concerns for bats even harder. Extreme weather events make environments unpredictable, and bats may not be able to time things like migration or hibernation effectively, and they may have to move to new habitats to find food or escape hostile temperatures. Many of our solutions to protect bats also help protect and buffer the climate. So climate wins for bats are going to be climate wins for humans. Bat researchers, including ourselves, we already have a very deep love for bats. But there are really excellent economic and cultural significant reasons for the services that bats provide to us. And we often don't realize these services, and we take them for granted every single day. In the United States alone, some economists have estimated that insect-feeding bats save humans $23 billion in pest controls and save $1.2 million in the rice fields of Thailand. When you expand this to the entire globe, you can imagine just how much value bats add to economies through their just every day, every night foraging and insect suppression. A lot of our popular or culturally valued cultivated crops or fruits, like agave for tequila and mezcal, mangoes, bananas, and durian are pollinated by bats at night. And we can clearly see the effects when these bats disappear. Durian is the king of fruit. It draws really strong emotions from people at times, but it is a delicious and highly sought after fruit that is almost exclusively pollinated by bats. When the large pollinating bats disappeared from durian plantations in Southeast Asia, this led to reduced crop sizes and ultimately forced companies to hire expensive manual labor to pollinate flowers by hand. And this is just to keep up with the demand from a multi-million-dollar industry. As bats disappear, we have to apply more pesticides, invest more in labor, and put more stress on our societies and economies to replace the services that bats provided for free as they went about their nightly lives. A recent study linked the decline in bats from white nose syndrome in the eastern US to an increase in pesticide use, and even extended this to an increase in human infant mortality as a consequence of that pesticide use. While this isn't necessarily a causal relationship, it does really hit the true value that bats have to our overall health and wellness. We need bats, and bats need us. They need friends. So human welfare, we've seen, is delicately linked with the conservation interests of bats worldwide. And the happier that bats are, the happier we will be too.
Because bats have been for so long so misunderstood, for those of us who are fortunate enough to work with these really special animals, it's important for us to share what we've learned and dispel some of the myths and mystery that surround bats' daily lives. So here at the Smithsonian Bat Lab, we hold a monthly public program called Gamboa Bat Nights, where we share bat research with audiences of all ages. If you've never been, this is your invitation. It's conducted in both English and Spanish. It's free and open to the public. And if you're in Panama, come visit us, and we encourage you to meet these amazing bats in person. We'd like to close our presentation with the dedication. So Bat Island, this book, is dedicated to the scientific achievements and to the wonderful memory of our dear friend, Elizabeth Calco, whose work inspired the research behind so many of the bat stories we've told you today. Proceeds from the purchase of each book go toward funding fellowships at the Smithsonian for the next generation of tropical bat researchers. So thanks so much to all of you for your attention and for your interest in the wonders of these tropical bats.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. I love bats. There's an argument in my home about whether or not they're just kitties with wings, but that's for another time. So let's see here. I'm going to leave this up for a couple more minutes. So if people want to take a photo with the QR code, follow the QR code. I'm going to start with a question that we received a lot. So I'll ask Caitlin's question. Caitlin from Franklin Parish Library says, what made you all each individually want to focus on studying bats? What was your moment where you knew that this is what you wanted to dedicate your research to?
Who wants to take that one? We all have different reasons, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. We'd love to hear all of you.
Okay, I can start. So I actually did my PhD research on primates. I worked on lemurs for a long time. And when I moved to Panama, I was looking for a new project, and I asked Rachel, who was running a bat lab there at the time, if I could join her to kind of, explore some different kinds of questions that I had. And through that experience and through working with those bats, I realized just how amazing they are and how many different things we can learn about them and how they can answer lots of different questions about the way that the world works. And from that time, I just switched over to bats. It was pretty amazing. And now I've sort of taken another step away from that to focus more on their conservation, how we can actively apply conservation methods just to keep bats around. So it's been, at least for me, a journey from fascination to actually now protection.
Should I go on?
Yeah, go for it.
For me, it was maybe a similar story. I was studying at a very technical university and missed doing something hands-on, and so I volunteered in bat conservation. It was pretty much coincidental because I just saw an ad looking for people, and that indirectly brought me to the tropics for the first time. I did my master's thesis in Costa Rica, and seeing that incredible diversity and matching it to the absolutely appalling lack of knowledge about them, I guess, that's what got me hooked and keeps me hooked to this day.
And I started with just a general love of animal behavior. But I was living in Austin, Texas for grad school. And of course, Austin has this incredible bridge, the Congress Avenue Bridge, with 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats. So I started working with them a little bit in grad school. And it was at that time that my advisor connected me to the possibilities at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and the neotropical bats here. And I came down, this was first year of my PhD. I started working with these frog-eating bats that we highlighted a little bit in the presentation. And it was like love at first sight. And now, 20 years later, I'm still working with that same species of bat.
And that's also when we met.
It is. Actually, all three of us met in Panama. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to move to bat habitats and bat houses, because we have a lot of people asking and saying that they have built bat houses in the past, and so a lot of them are saying, how come the bats never move in? How do we attract them to these houses?
Question for Teague, I would say.
It's getting bats into your bat house is kind of a crapshoot, to be honest. Bats can be very choosy and picky about their roosts, and installing a bat house doesn't necessarily mean that bats are going to use it. It gives them different choices in habitats. And in North America, a relatively few number of bat species will actually use a bat house. So things like little brown bats, Mexican free-tailed bats, evening bats, those bats will use houses, but not most other bat species. But really, if you're trying to do something to help bats, and that's your intention by having a bat house, then really trying to focus on raising native plants that create food for bats is a really, really great alternative for that. And then if you want to see what kind of bats are in your yard, then you can buy relatively inexpensive ultrasonic detectors that plug into your phone to monitor the bats that are around there. It's less satisfying than seeing bats come out of your bat house, but you might have a little bit more success.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl from Lee County Library System is saying, do tropical bats carry diseases? Do we need to be careful of their droppings? And Leah is adding, are they covered in salmonella germs like chickens and iguana pets? What is their effect or their potential harm to humans? We know all the good that they can do, but is there anything we have to worry about?
Do you want me to jump in on that one?
Sure.
Well, it's actually extraordinary. So they, if we touch on this just a little bit, they have really incredible immune systems. And it looks like this is tied to the adaptations that allow them to fly. So they produce a lot of metabolic waste and have these anti-inflammatory mechanisms so that the waste products produced during this incredibly energy consuming event, flight, don't hurt their own cells. And this seems to have conferred both the extraordinary long lifespans that Dina mentioned, and then also these incredible immune systems. And it all is tied into anti-inflammation. What it means, though, is that they can carry a lot of viruses without getting sick themselves. And this is something that we, as humans, are super interested in. How can they do this? How can we perhaps learn from the mechanisms that they're using and protect ourselves? But it also means that you do have to be careful when you come in contact with bats. So for example, everybody in our bat lab, we don't allow anybody to work with bats at all unless they're fully vaccinated for rabies. So any mammal can carry rabies. And that disease can be fatal if untreated. There's a number of other viruses that they also can carry. So I think the message that we really try to make sure everybody gets when we talk to public audiences at our bat nights, for example, is don't be afraid of bats. They're incredible. They have all these extraordinary adaptations and behaviors, but don't get too close. Don't handle them. Definitely don't handle them barehanded. If you find a bat in your house, for example, open a window, turn off all ceiling fans, turn off the lights, let it get out by itself. And I would say the same thing for droppings. Just if you can try to discourage, if you have a bat that's like loves roosting right over your front door or something, see if you can alter the structure of wherever it's roosting so its inclination is to roost somewhere else, because you don't want to come in contact with bat bodily fluids. That would be my answer. Do you two have additions to that?
No, I just want to add that I think the answer to the salmonella part of the question is no, as far as I am aware
Correct.
of.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, thank you. Elisa is saying, do bat muscle cells have any special adaptations, for example, extra mitochondria or something, to help support the production of energy for flight?
I'll take that one. So they don't have extra mitochondria, but they have much more efficient mitochondria. So basically their entire physiology is tuned to be able to maximize energy efficiency. So they produce a lot more. They transport, I would say, sugar-feeding bats. Their sugar that they eat gets incorporated into their metabolism within about 8 minutes. So it actually sidesteps most of their digestion and leaks out of their gut directly into their bloodstream. So that's to get sugar into their metabolic processes to produce ATP. Their mitochondria are more efficient, so they're actually producing more power per unit of cell. And then their bloodstream and their sort of filtering processes are also more efficient to get all of the waste products and carbon dioxide out as well. So they don't really have many more sort of specialized cellular structures, but they make the most out of the basic mammalian body plan.
It's so interesting. I think it was a couple of months ago, I saw a program about the study of sugar eating bats and a link to diabetes. I think they're trying to see if there's
bats don't get diabetes. They just like pound back sugar, glucose and fructose, and nothing happens. They're so resistant to any of the shocks that come from extreme sugar exposure. It's amazing.
It is
They
amazing.
also never brush their teeth, and they don't.
But they chew on all that like fibrous material, so keeps it going.
Nature's toothbrush.
Nature's toothbrush. Over fig parts, I guess.
Kate says, given that bats are rather social, how is it that they avoid interference with the echolocation signals of other bats of their species?
Should I take it? Do you want to take it, Rachel?
Go for it. That is a very good question. I would say there's entire labs studying that question, but
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah.
This is a big area of research and kind of related also to what I do with the social information use among bats. Yes, it is a problem. Echolocation calls are extremely loud. At the level of the mouth of the bat, they're as loud as a rock concert. We just can't hear them, luckily for us, I guess. And so it is a problem because what the bat wants is to send out a call and then receive the echo, which is going to be much weaker than a call. So the calls of other bats around you can interfere with that and can mask your own calls. So there are studies showing that the bats will adjust the frequency of their calls, for example. So they will call a little bit higher or a little bit lower so they can distinguish the echoes of their own calls from those of others. But they will also adjust their calling rates when they're around others and maybe transition to listening more to what the other bats are saying instead of calling as much themselves.
Thank you. Chloe and a lot of other people, we got this question a lot, want to know what kind of an average day looks like out in the field for you all.
Gosh, it varies a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I would say most typical. So we really work like with bats straight out of the forest. Like there's some labs that will light dark shift their bats so they can have the lovely benefit of working in the day rather than the night. We don't do that. We're catching bats, taking a look at them, and then letting them go again. So generally, if you go into the bat lab here in Gamboa, for example, in the morning, completely empty. It's silent. There's nobody. Everybody's asleep. And then by sort of midday, early afternoon, you start seeing some activity. People will get out their mist nets, go out, capture bats. We do a lot of behavioral experiments in flight cages. So then we'll keep bats for short times in captivity. A big part of that is like just getting them very comfortable eating in captivity. But then you work with them all night, basically. And you have to, it's as when you do have a bat in captivity that you're studying, there's no weekend. You just like, you're on deck for feeding that bat. I would say it shifts a lot for roosts. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Dina.
I just wanted to add that in Panama, at least, we make sure we have good rubber boots and good mosquito-proof clothing and a good hand lamp.
I would say also add that the opposite for Dina and I, when we work together, we work on tracking and movement of animals a lot. And we find species a lot of the time that we can catch in their roosts during the day so that we can get entire social groups, so we can get a good sample size of all these animals to put small tags on them to figure out where they go and who they're with. I was in West Texas a couple weeks ago, for example, catching bats underneath highway bridges to track them to figure out where they go to spend their winters so we can understand a little bit more about potential white nose dynamics. And I was just underneath there during the middle of the day. It's 110 outside in West Texas with a butterfly net and trying to get them to like fly down into my butterfly net. So instead of working all at night, I was just working throughout the heat to try to get these bats so that we can figure out where they go.
And I'm so jealous about that, Teague. We caught a U.S. species I've never seen.
So you mentioned you were trying to kind of track where they're going for the winter to see if that could lead you to some sort of information about white nose syndrome. Carol is asking what other efforts are being made to find a cure or an antidote to white nose syndrome.
I'll take that one. So there are a number of different avenues that people are exploring to combat white nose. There are surface treatments. So there are a couple of different kinds of things that we can spray on the walls of mines, for example, that will kill the fungus or stop it from reproducing. But we still don't really know the effects that it has on natural caves. So we're limited in how we can apply it right now. Other labs are working on a vaccine for white nose syndrome, so we could vaccinate bats for white nose infections, and we'll have to see how that plays out, whether or not it's effective, and how how easy it is to give this vaccine to a large number of animals. And we've also working on some other genetic engineering techniques that we can apply to natural caves that only really target the white nose fungus and then stop it from reproducing as well. So there are a variety of different kinds of technological interventions that we're trying, but nothing is solid yet. Nothing is guaranteed yet. And so that's one of the reasons why we think that helping those bats that are actually able to survive white nose syndrome to rapidly recover from the effects of those infections every winter is really important, because it's that remnant population of those animals that are now somewhat resistant to the infections. But we need to give them the best leg up to be able to go out, build babies as fast as possible, since bats only have one baby every year. So their reproductive rates are relatively slow, especially for an mammal of its size. And so we have to do the best to give them sort of every advantage possible, because they're going to keep getting hit by white nose.
Wow. So other than white nose, then Anand wants to know, are there any other predators that exclusively feed on bats, especially given the extensive presence of bats across various geographies?
Should I take that one?
Sure.
So it's a very good question too. And the answer is yes. There are some species of birds that are very much adapted to predation on bats. One in Africa and one on the American continent, the bat hawk and the bat falcon, which wait at the exit of roosts for the emergence in the evening and then just catch them out of the air. But apart from that, I feel like it's more flexible species that have adapted to including bats in their diet. One of the most dangerous predators for bats are our cats. House cats, strays, but also other species of birds like owls can learn to wait for the bats. Toucans have been shown to eat bats, or hornbills in the old world. Monkeys have been observed eating bats. Many animals like to eat those little pesticide snacks, but yeah, I would not say that there's that many species that are exclusively adapted.
So,
that actually one, well, it's been hypothesized that that's one of the, is this where you're going, Teague?
I was
going
to talk about something else.
So bats, basically they take all the niches that birds have during the day, bats occupy those niches at night. And so the question is, why did they shift nocturnal that way? And one of the hypotheses is that it really gets them out of the predation pressure that from all those diurnal predators. So certainly there's a ton of opportunistic predators, like all the ones that Dina mentioned. There's also like snakes and frogs, and sometimes like larger species of bats will go for smaller species of bats. But on the whole, I think it's a much safer spot to be operating in the night skies versus the day skies.
So at Bat Conservation International's Bracken Cave, which is outside of San Antonio, this is the largest maternity colony of any known bat. We have somewhere between 10 and 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats that come there to reproduce every year. And there's so many bats that the emergence for those bats has to start about an hour and a half before sunset. And so we'll see these large number of bats start coming out of the mouth of the cave, and everybody lines up outside the cave. So, snakes, raccoons, possums, skunks, Swainson's hawks, red-tailed hawks, and owls everybody will be outside of that cave waiting for bats to come out so that they can take any that accidentally either hit the ground or they can pull them directly out of the air. So big aggregations like that become big attractions for a variety of different predators.
If you're ever near there, go see that. It's really a spectacle.
Yep.
Including the predators, but not just. Really a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Well, I can't believe that we are nearly at the top of the hour already. Time has flown by. I guess the last question I'm going to ask then, because we did have quite a few people talk about how can they get involved working with bats and or on conservation projects, or we even had a recent graduate say that they would love to get involved post-grad. So how can people get involved with working with bats?
I feel like the audience is from the US, and that's not. I could give you advice how to get involved with bats in Germany or Switzerland. So maybe Teague, you should take that one.
Sure. So there are a variety of different bat research networks around the world. The Global Union of Bat Conservation Networks is a place where you can look for all these different sort of regional networks. You can also follow some of our social media. So for Bat Conservation International's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, every other social media platform, we post different kinds of stories about the work that we do, but also the work that others are doing. And so you can reach out to them as well. But getting active with things like your local master naturalists who have additional connections to state biologists and conservation groups is a really great way to get some of that experience and also get to know some of the people who are doing that work.
And then I would add that for those you mentioned postgraduate work, there, in addition to the conservation side, for research, there internships. Smithsonian, for example, offers a number of research internship possibilities. And again, as Teague said, you can look for those on social media or go right to the Smithsonian website, for example.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. And thank you for your dedication to these beautiful mammals and the important work that you do. We had a great time talking to you for the last hour, so thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Yes. That's great. Excellent questions.
I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our audience members for joining us for our author talk today. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Below the live stream video in that resources area, if you scroll down, you can find a link to Bat Island, a rare journey into the hidden world of tropical bats. If you haven't looked at the book yet, definitely check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. We look forward to everyone joining us on October 9th when we talk to best-selling author Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and again on October 21st when we talk to best-selling author and psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb. Be sure to register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I'm Brayden Adler, and thank you for joining us.